5732. We're out of here.
KPFA, KPFB Berkeley, 88.1 KFCF from Fresno.
Good evening. It's Thursday, August 1st. The House of Representatives passes a new pared-down COVID relief bill. But at best, it's a ploy for negotiations with the White House because it won't be going anywhere in the Senate. President Trump planning a pair of campaign rallies this weekend in La Crosse and Green Bay, Wisconsin. The plan is raising alarms because of the coronavirus. The two cities are coronavirus hotspots in Wisconsin, a state where cases have been surging for weeks. The Trump campaign extending its efforts to disrupt the November election to the local level, sending letters to county election officials in North Carolina telling them to ignore the latest state election commission's orders on mail-in ballots. Heat advisories put in effect along about 3/4 of the California coast today. The National Weather Service issuing a red flag fire warning for the area encompassing the Glass Fire in Napa and Sonoma counties, as well as for the North Bay Hills and the East Bay Hills and Santa Cruz Mountains. Governor Newsom tours the Glass Fire zone in the wine country. And California Governor Newsom signs a first-in-the-nation law setting up a process to develop a detailed plan for reparations for slavery. The law to create a 9-member task force to come up with proposals for how the state could provide reparations for African Americans. From Pacifica Radio, KPFA Berkeley, KPFK Los Angeles, this is the Evening News. I'm Mark Miracle. The number of Americans seeking new unemployment benefits declined last week to a still high 837,000. The Labor Department's report indicated that companies are still cutting an historically high number of jobs, though the weekly numbers have become less reliable as states have increased their efforts to root out fraudulent claims and process earlier applications that have been piling up. For example, California, which accounts for more than 1/4 of aid applications, simply provided the same figure it submitted the previous week. The state had said it would stop accepting jobless claims online, new ones, so it could tackle a backlog of 600,000 claims. Initial jobless claims are stuck above the highest levels reached by the Great Recession of 2008 and 2009. Along with the report by American and United Airlines that they plan to lay off 32,000 workers, Disney said it will lay off 28,000 workers at its theme parks in California and Florida. Meanwhile, the House of Representatives voted along mostly party lines tonight to pass a revised COVID-19 relief bill, as negotiations remain stalled with the White House and a deal between Democrats and Republicans on urgently needed aid remained out of reach. The proposal, a pared-down version of the HEROES Act passed by the House Democrats in May, passed on a 214 to 207 vote. All Republicans voted against it, along with 18 Democrats. The Republican-controlled Senate likely will not act on the bill. Republican senators have balked at a higher price tag for more relief. The White House is backing a $400 a week pandemic jobless benefit and dangled the possibility of a COVID-19 relief bill of $1.6 trillion. That offer by Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin on unemployment is higher than many Republicans would like to see in any potential COVID deal, but it's still significantly below what the Democrats have proposed in a compromise position. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi ticked off a few of the key items in the Democrats' revised $2.2 trillion relief bill.
whether it's rental assistance or mortgage assistance, whether it's food for the food insecure in our country, whether it's health care if you lose your job. If we have a provision in there to immediately have people qualify for the Affordable Care Act with the highest level of subsidy for being part of the system. It doesn't require an open enrollment and stuff. It's a very smart bill. We're very proud of it, and we want people to see what the possibilities are.
Pelosi said the administration position still falls far short on aid to state and local governments. And she said she won't agree to settle. Some of you have asked, isn't something better than nothing? No, Pelosi told reporters. President Trump has signed a bill to fund the government through December 11th, averting the possibility of a government shutdown. The Senate approved the funding bill by a vote of 84-10. The House passed the bill last week. Meanwhile, economic justice advocates have launched a campaign demanding Wall Street and the Federal Reserve Bank provide zero-interest loans to cities, states, and other public sector borrowers. They say this would return billions of dollars a year to local municipalities, allowing governments to fund needed services, replace crumbling infrastructure, and prevent further devastation from austerity measures, as many cities never fully recovered from the recession of 2008 and have taken a beating in providing for needs caused by the coronavirus pandemic. KPFA's Chris Lee reports.
Financially struggling state and local governments could save more than $160 billion every year if their municipal loan interest payments were slashed, and the Federal Reserve Bank, the Fed, could step in to help. That's according to a report from the Action Center on Race and the Economy, ACRE. Local governments were hurting even before the pandemic and now are being forced to slash services and payrolls. Illinois Democratic Congressmember Chuy Garcia says implementing austerity measures like cutting essential services would further depress the economy and cause irreversible harm to his constituents.
The last recession hit us hard. We talk all the time about the financial collapse, but we don't talk enough about the austerity that came after the Great Recession. Chicago closed dozens of schools and cut funding for community centers and libraries. All over the country, as state and local governments cut their budgets, the recovery stopped and unemployment got worse. Our suffering was predictable. It was a political choice. Austerity is a choice.
Garcia and other supporters of the campaign to, quote, cancel Wall Street, unquote, are calling on the Fed and lenders on Wall Street to provide zero-interest loans to the public sector. Chicago alone stands to gain $1 billion if this rule were enacted. The ACRE report finds that under the current system, cities and states with more people of color are more likely to be charged higher interest rates on their municipal loans. The higher cost of that debt means Black, brown, and poor communities bear the greatest burden when cuts are made to social services. If municipal lending practices that favor profit over human welfare are allowed to continue, Flint, Michigan is a glaring example of where poor cities across the country could be headed. Naria Sharif is director of Flint Rising.
As I organized my neighbors to go and speak to local elected officials and appointed officials at the state level, the message was clear. We weren't going back to a safe source of drinking water because the city was on the hook for the KWA bond deal and other previous bond debt. We were a sacrifice community that was too Black and too poor to deserve clean water. If we had federal investment in our infrastructure, we wouldn't have regressive fees and taxation where families are having their water turned off, losing their homes, or having their families broken up because of municipal bond debt.
Sharif says 18 months of cutting corners has aged Flint's water lines by over 20 years. Flint Mayor Karen Weaver said in 2016 it could cost the city as much as $1.5 billion to fix the city's damaged water infrastructure. Sharif says she supports progressive taxation or increasing taxes for the wealthiest people and businesses, another demand of the Cancel Wall Street campaign. She says that progressive taxation would have prevented Flint's human rights catastrophe and implemented commenting that now could help her city fix its aging infrastructure, finally become ADA compliant by funding sidewalk curb cuts, and pay for special education teachers to instruct Flint's lead-poisoned children. Bob Hockett, another supporter, is a professor of finance who used to work at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. He says governments depend on borrowed money. In the aftermath of the pandemic, many local governments are pleading to their states for liquidity to finance essential services. But there is none because those funds are tied up in the Fed, and the Fed has gone astray of its mission.
When the Fed system was first founded over 100 years ago in 1913, in order to get congressional buy-in from across the country for a central bank in the U.S., assurances had to be written into the Federal Reserve Act itself to ensure that it would function as a system of local and regional development banks. These Federal Reserve banks, there are 12 regional Fed banks, are meant to be local and regional development institutions. They weren't meant to function as a gigantic liquidity sinkhole for Wall Street banking institutions.
Hockett says the Fed was designed to assist local communities with development, and this campaign seeks to restore the agency to its original purpose. I'm Chris Lee, reporting for KPFA.
President Donald Trump opposes changing the rules for the remaining two presidential debates against Democrat Joe Biden, but his campaign says he will attend regardless. Tuesday's opening debate in Cleveland quickly turned chaotic with frequent interruptions by the candidates, most particularly Trump. The Commission on Presidential Debates says it intends to ensure that additional tools to maintain order are in place for the remaining debates. The commission and representatives from Trump's and Biden's campaigns met yesterday to discuss the previous night's debate and potential changes. Some potential changes that have been discussed include adding opening and closing statements and shortening open discussion, having a mic kill switch to cut off a candidate who won't keep quiet when the other candidate is supposed to be talking is also under discussion. It's not clear if it was formally proposed by the commission. Trump, a Republican, tweeted today that he opposes any changes, saying, "Why would I allow the debate commission to change the rules for the second and third debates when I easily won last time?" On a conference call with reporters, Trump's re-election campaign indicated that Trump would attend the remaining debates, regardless of whether or not the rules are changed. Meanwhile, Trump is planning a pair of campaign rallies this weekend in La Crosse and Green Bay, Wisconsin. That plan raising alarms because of the coronavirus. The two cities are hot spots for the infection in Wisconsin, a state where COVID-19 cases have been surging for weeks. Even though the rallies are planned for outside, Trump's rallies often attract people who do not wear masks or practice social distancing, as recommended by public health experts. Last night at a rally in Duluth, Minnesota, Trump repeated his xenophobic attacks on Minnesota Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, who came to the U.S. as a child refugee from Somalia. He accused Omar, who, of course, is a U.S. citizen, in addition to being a member of Congress, of telling us how to run our country.
Then she tells us how to run our country. Can you believe it? How the hell did Minnesota elect her? What the hell is wrong with you people? Right? What the hell happened? 700% increase, refugees coming from the most dangerous places in the world, including Yemen, Syria, and your favorite country, Somalia, right? You love Somalia. This guy loves Somalia. Biden will turn Minnesota into a refugee camp, and he said that. Overwhelming public resources, overcrowding schools, and inundating your hospitals. You know that. It's already there. It's a disgrace what they've done to your state. It's a disgrace, okay?
And Trump continued to fuel the faithful's fiction that no matter what happens on November 3rd, he's not going anywhere.
You know, someday we're not going to be doing this anymore. What are they going to do without Trump? What are they going to do? Those poor people. Look at all of them. Whoa. That's a lot of people. What are they going to do? going to do when in 8, 12, maybe 16 years, I said, let's hang it up. Let's hang it up. 16 more years.
You're listening to the Evening News on KPFA Berkeley, KPFK Los Angeles, KFCF Fresno, online at kpfa.org. More fallout from Trump's refusal to condemn white supremacy on Tuesday night's debate. The Senate's only African-American Republican, Tim Scott, saying white supremacy should be denounced at every turn.
I think he misspoke. I think he should correct it. If he doesn't correct it, I guess he didn't misspeak.
And Republican Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said he wanted to associate himself with Scott's remarks.
He said it was unacceptable not to condemn white supremacists, and so I do so in the strongest possible way.
Reporter Lily Bolke has more in this report.
And that's what danger is. When white supremacist ideas get to be seen as more mainstream and acceptable. When our president says stand by, that makes them seem acceptable as opposed to detestable.
Kenneth Stern, with the Bard College Center for the Study of Hate, says the far-right militant group Proud Boys took President Trump's debate mention as a shout-out, a stamp of approval. Yesterday, the memes were on T-shirts and related merchandise through Amazon and other online retailers until the stores pulled the items. Online analysts reported a major increase in far-right traffic on less moderated platforms where extremist comments aren't banned as often. Like Stern, Cassie Miller is also alarmed. She's an expert on hate groups with the Southern Poverty Law Center.
There is a real possibility that we could get far-right groups going out to polling places, to ballot boxes, and engaging in voter suppression or intimidation.
The Proud Boys was founded by British-Canadian Gavin McInnes, who also helped launch Vice Media. McInnes sued the Southern Poverty Law Center for labeling the Proud Boys a, quote, hate group. McInnes has since disavowed the organization. The only black Republican in the Senate, Tim Scott, said yesterday that white supremacy should always be condemned, but the president simply, quote, misspoke and should clarify his statement. Other GOP lawmakers agreed with Scott. Trump tried to walk it back, saying he doesn't know who the Proud Boys are, but again quickly pivoted to condemning far-left violence, even though national security agencies consistently report more violence committed by far-right extremist groups. Elections officials and experts say the pandemic will make this an election season, and media outlets won't be able to make the quick calls they normally do. But the actual certification process doesn't change. That period right after the election, when the public is used to quick calls, is what concerns Kenneth Stern from Bard.
Trump has made very clear that he's going to say that this was rigged. He's encouraging people to sort of watch the polls and so forth. I really worry that we're going to see, if not violence, potential for violence and certain vilification and bullying around the time of the election and in the immediate aftermath.
From Pacifica Network and Public News Service, I'm Lily Bolke.
Last week, a Proud Boys leader repeated President Trump's call for people to show up at polling places and monitor the vote. Suzanne Potter reports.
Civil rights groups are criticizing President Trump's remarks at Tuesday night's debate, where he called on the right-wing group Proud Boys to stand back and stand by. Yesterday, he amended that to stand down, but the group, which has been involved in violent confrontations at anti-racism rallies, welcomed the shout-out. Melvin Medina with the ACLU Connecticut says the president's initial comments were extremely divisive.
Donald Trump, he's touting the line of law and order, and I think he has weaponized the rhetoric around law and order to be targeted against a movement that values Black lives.
The Proud Boys posted ecstatic responses on social media and began raising money off it by selling T-shirts emblazoned with the president's words. But late Wednesday, Amazon stopped selling merchandise with the stand back and stand by message. The Proud Boys deny ties to white nationalism and self-identify as Western chauvinists. The Southern Poverty Law Center, which tracks hate groups, says Proud Boys do have a presence in the Nutmeg State. Medina notes that last year, a police officer in East Hampton retired early and resigned from the Proud Boys after it was revealed he was a dues-paying member of the group.
His reasoning for leaving the Proud Boys membership was because he believed that the Proud Boys would be attacked by the left wing, and not recognizing that actually the Proud Boys espouse an ideology that is harmful and hateful.
A 2001 report on extremism in Connecticut found a small presence of other extremist groups, including the Klan, the World Church of the Creator, the Council of Conservative Citizens, and the National Alliance. For Public News Service, I'm Suzanne Potter.
When Donald Trump's campaign took issue with a new rule on processing some votes in North Carolina, it didn't just complain to the State Board of Elections or even file a lawsuit. It wrote to some of the state's 100 local election offices with extraordinary guidance. Ignore the rule. The North Carolina Republican Party advises you to not follow the procedures. That's what Heather Ford wrote in an email to county officials last week. The email urging defiance was a glimpse at the unusually aggressive, hyper-local legal strategy the Trump campaign is activating as voting begins. Through threatening letters, lawsuits, viral videos, and presidential misinformation, the campaign and its Republican allies are going to new lengths to contest election procedures county by county across the battleground states. That means piling new pressure on the often low-profile election officials on the front line of the vote count, escalating micro-disputes over voting rules and seeking out trouble in their backyards. The local approach already is producing a blizzard of voting-related complaints. Trump and his allies have then seized on the disputes, distorted them, and used them to sow broad doubts of fairness and accuracy. It's clearly based on an overall strategy to disrupt the election as much as possible, said Barry Richard, who represented George Bush and his campaign in the 2000 election recount in the state of Florida. He said, "You're really seeing a broad-based generalized strategy to suppress the vote by the Republican Party." The strategy was on display last week when Trump tweeted about 9 discarded ballots in Lucerne County, Pennsylvania, and Trump's press secretary, Kayleigh McEnany, from the White House last week flagged sacks of mail being found outside Appleton, Wisconsin, claiming the unreliability of mail ballots. But Wisconsin's election board today said those sacks contained no ballots. This week, another hot spot was the Philadelphia fight over whether Trump campaign poll monitors could be allowed into newly opened satellite election offices. Trump poll monitors requested entry, but city election officials said neither party's observers had a legal right to access the buildings. Under state law, poll monitors can only observe live, in-person voting and not places where people can register, fill out early ballots, and drop them off to be counted weeks later. The campaign sent observers to the sites, and in one case, they were turned away by a Republican on the city election commission. The campaign threatened to sue, but has not done so. In North Carolina, where black voters were sending in a disproportionate number of mail-in ballots with errors, the Board of Elections settled a lawsuit with a voting rights group, making it easier for voters to fix the errors. The board's 2 Republicans quit in protest, and the Republican Party sued to block the settlement. North Carolina's Democratic Attorney General in court papers included a Trump campaign email to some local Board of Elections members as an example of how he said the Republican Party was improperly undermining an official state directive. 2 conservative activists have been charged with multiple felonies in Michigan for a series of false robocalls that aim to dissuade urban residents in Detroit and other cities from voting by mail. Jacob Wohl and Jack Berkman each were charged today with 4 felony counts in Detroit, including intimidating voters in violation of election law, conspiracy, and using a computer to commit crimes. The calls falsely warned residents in majority black Detroit and urban areas in at least 4 other states that voting by mail in the November 3rd election could subject people to arrest, debt collection, and forced vaccination. California Governor Gavin Newsom has signed legislation banning certain chokeholds as he approved several new laws designed to increase oversight of the criminal justice system. The state attorney general will be required to investigate fatal police shootings of unarmed civilians under another new law that has been years in the making. Newsom acted over the objection of the County Sheriff's Association when he approved another law making it clear that county supervisors can create oversight boards and inspectors general with subpoena powers over the independently elected sheriffs. But amid national calls to defund the police, he vetoed a priority bill of anti-police violence groups that would have provided state funding for community organizations to take over some police duties in an effort to de-escalate confrontations. Religious leaders in Louisville, Kentucky, providing sanctuary for protesters under a citywide curfew, which was lifted on Monday, say they're being targeted by law enforcement there. Nadia Ramlagan reports.
A legal loophole protects an individual from being in public after curfew if they're traveling to or from a place of worship. Reverend Ryan Eller of the group New Moral Majority says churches have been subjected to surveillance drones and a heavy police presence outside their doors.
There's now a lot of contention and conflict over those sanctuary spaces, and we certainly feel that our religious freedoms as well as our freedom of speech have been violated.
Protest calling for the arrests of the 3 police officers involved in the killing of 26-year-old Louisville resident Breonna Taylor have continued for more than 125 days. The state attorney general's office is expected to publicly release audio recordings of court proceedings in the case on Friday. Eller says despite national media depictions of protest violence, Louisville residents have peacefully marched and provided food and water, medical care, counseling, and prayer to one another. He adds that the number of clergy members who have participated in the protest is unprecedented.
I mean, we have faith leaders who are rabbis and imams and priests and pastors, white, black, Latino, and from every different racial background that have been supporting this movement.
Eller says protesters and Taylor's family have a clear message for Kentucky Attorney General Daniel Cameron.
There are a number of things that movement leaders, particularly the black women in our community that have been leading this movement around Breonna Taylor, are calling for. The first, quite simple, and that's transparency.
Earlier this week, former police officer Brett Hankinson pleaded not guilty to 3 counts of wanton endangerment for firing into a neighboring apartment during the March raid on Taylor's home. For Public News Service, I'm Nadia Ramlagan.
In graphic, matter-of-fact chatter picked up on his body camera microphone, a Louisiana state trooper implicated in the death of a black man can be heard talking of beating and choking him before all of a sudden he just went limp. The 27-second audio clip obtained by the Associated Press is the most direct evidence to emerge yet in the death last year of Ronald Green, which troopers initially blamed on injuries from a car crash. The case has now become the subject of a federal civil rights investigation, and there are growing calls for authorities to release the full body cam video. California Governor Gavin Newsom has signed a first-in-the-nation law setting up a process to develop a detailed plan for reparations for slavery. The law creates a 9-member task force to come up with proposals for how the state could provide reparations to African Americans, what form those reparations might take, and who would be eligible to receive them. Newsom said he hopes the law has ripple effects across the country.
A bipartisan bill on reparation, proving a paradigm that we hope will be resonant all across the United States.
California entered the Union in 1850 as a free state, but the state did permit white people to bring enslaved African Americans to California. The legislature even passed a law making it legal to arrest an enslaved person who ran away to freedom and return them to the slave owner. Democratic San Diego Assembly member Shirley Weber authored the reparations bill.
California has come to terms with many of its issues, but it has yet to come to terms with its role in slavery. And the fact that that many of our families, my family came to California because they thought this was a golden state with tremendous opportunity. And it was in comparison to coming from Hope, Arkansas. But they also had to come to realization that this state has deeply rooted issues about race and slavery, and that we can demonstrate in what we do through all of our institutions of what it means to be enslaved, the negative impact, and how we need to repair individuals to do that.
The law does not say the reparations must be cash payments. Other options could include forgiving student loans, paying for public works projects, job training, for instance. California Governor Newsom has vetoed a bill that would have made ethnic studies a California high school graduation requirement, citing controversy over the model curriculum. Assemblyman Jose Medina criticized the veto of the bill as a failure to push back against President Trump. Newsom said he supports the ethnic studies concept, but cited ongoing discussions and revisions on what should be included in the classes. The bill would have required high schools to provide ethnic studies starting in the 2025-26 school year and would have made ethnic studies a high school graduation requirement starting in the 2029-30 school year. A nurse in Quebec, Canada, has been fired and an investigation launched after a dying Indigenous woman in a hospital documented herself being insulted and taunted. Jacob Resnick has the story.
Joyce Echequan had gone to the hospital in Joliet, northeast of Montreal, complaining about stomach pains. Before her death, she filmed herself from her hospital bed. The video showed she was in distress and pleading for help. It also showed two female hospital staff coming into her room and making insulting comments. One says she's stupid as hell and that she's only good for sex and better off dead. That video, after going online, sparked widespread anger. It also led to an appeal from Ghislaine Picard of the Assembly of First Nations to call on the Quebec government to address a culture of racism.
In that video, you can clearly hear the nurses insulting Joyce because she is Atikamekw, because she is Indigenous. We recognize the filthy prejudices that continue to exist today.
Picard says a coroner's inquest won't change anything about the racism displayed by the nurses. He says it's a question of attitude and culture, and discrimination in public services is still far too prevalent. The Premier of Quebec offered his condolences to the family and confirmed that a nurse had been fired. He acknowledged that racism exists in Quebec. He added that what happened is unacceptable. He said there would be two inquiries, one from the coroner, another from the Regional Health Authority. For National Native News, I'm Dan Karpinchuk.
You are listening to the evening news on KPFA in Berkeley, KPFK, Los Angeles, KFCF Fresno, online at kpfa.org. It's an hour-long newscast, airs each night at 6 o'clock. There's a half-hour edition on the weekend, and it's always available to you because it's archived online at kpfa.org. I'm Mark Miracle. We are more than halfway through the hour-long newscast tonight, and it is incumbent upon me to ask you for your financial support so that we can continue the journalistic effort here at KPFA without any strings attached to us. That's the way it is now. We want to keep any strings from being attached to us, or any ropes or chains, or even immaterial forces that might influence how we approach our journalistic duty. We want to be independent of those kinds of forces. I think you can see how easily, perhaps, or maybe not how easily, but how in the end, even some very good, principled, professional people can be swayed by the powers that be, by looking at what's happened to the scientific independence of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Some very good people in that institution have been somehow manipulated, forced, whatever term you'd like to use, into compromising their professional judgment and their independence. We don't want that to happen here. And that is why we don't accept any corporate underwriting from the big corporations that dominate the U.S. economy. and so much of its cultural life by their so-called philanthropic enterprises. Obviously, we don't have any commercials, but we don't have corporate underwriting, which most public stations of any size have given into. And we are not funded by any think tank or political party or any rich person of any size of wealth. And we don't even have any federal grants, some of which we're eligible for, technically, but the federal government won't give them to us. So it's us on this side of the microphone and you on the other side of the microphone, on the side of your radio, and we rely on you. I hope you rely on us for some things, including news and information, but we rely on you for the funding that it takes to provide that information. And we are trying to raise $450,000 in 8 days to keep this radio station on the air and independent, an oppositional voice to most of what you get over the airwaves. So that's the deal. The way you clinch the deal is by becoming a financial supporter of this enterprise. And you do that by calling us at 1-800-439-5732, by making a pledge or a donation or a contribution, or you can do it online at kpfa.org. Once again, I'm required to try to raise $2,500 tonight as part of this newscast. 1-800-439-5732, $2,500 our goal at kpfa.org. Anyone making any size of contribution tonight will receive KPFA's political history collection, which is called Don't Believe the Hype. It has mostly lectures and presentations from people like Richard Wolff, Understanding Socialism, Cornel West, the radical Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., Greg Palast, How Trump Stole the 2020 Election, Jason Stanley on how fascism works, David Clay Johnston on what Trump is doing to you, Peter Lindbaugh on Tom Paine and his lessons for our time, Rebecca Solnit, Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, Dar Jamal, Blair Imani, Richard Walker, and the like. 15 lectures on Don't Believing the Hype, the political history collection from KPFA. Any donation tonight at 1-800-439-5732 or online at kpfa.org will receive that collection. We're trying to raise $2,500. 1-800-439-5732 online at kpfa.org. That's not all we're trying to do, raise money. We're also trying to bring you the news, and here's some more of it. Middle and high school students in New York City came back to their schools today for the first time since the coronavirus forced a shutdown last March. Elementary school students returned earlier this week. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio said the schools in the nation's largest school district have launched a program to begin monthly testing of 10 to 20% of students and staff.
This is an absolutely amazing moment, fighting back this pandemic. And this morning, 1,600 New York City public schools open. Kids coming to school for the first time since March. We did something that other cities around this country could only dream of, because we have fought back this pandemic so well for so long, because we had the will and the focus to bring back our public schools for the good of our kids, our families, and all of New York City. This is a key moment in our rebirth.
Los Angeles Public Schools have begun a $150 million testing program to help determine when it will be safe for in-person instruction. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention recently said COVID-19 in school-aged children in the U.S. began rising in early September, as many return to classrooms. The coronavirus struck hard at the elderly early in the pandemic and is now increasingly infecting American children and teens, in a trend authorities say appears to be fueled by school reopenings and other activities. The American Academy of Pediatrics reported that children of all ages now make up 10% of U.S. cases. That's up from just 2% in April. The head of Pfizer, one of the drug makers racing to develop a coronavirus vaccine, told employees he was disappointed that its work was politicized during this week's presidential debate and tried to reassure U.S. staff that the company won't bend to pressure to move more quickly. Chief Executive Officer Albert Bourla told the employees today that the company is moving at the speed of science rather than under any political timing. That's according to a staff letter obtained by the Associated Press. President Trump said leading vaccine developers can go much faster than Trump's own health officials say. Carnival Cruise Line is canceling most U.S. sailings through the end of this year. It's the latest sign that the cruise industry's recovery from the coronavirus pandemic could still be many months away. The company says it's canceling sailings from all ports, except its home ports of Miami and Port Canaveral, Florida. But it stressed that it still might not sail from those ports in November and December. Carnival's announcement came the day after the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention extended a ban on large cruises in U.S. waters through October 31st. The no-sail order initially was issued in March and was set to expire September 30th. Leaders of the National Congress of American Indians, the National Indian Health Board, and the National Council of Urban Indian Health testified before a House Appropriations Subcommittee this week that COVID-19 is wreaking havoc on Native American communities. Antonia Gonzalez reports.
They urged lawmakers to ensure tribes are included in COVID-19 emergency response funding packages with flexible spending options. They also say accurate federal data collection is needed for allocations to meet tribal needs and for Indian country programs to be fully funded. Francis Crevier, CEO of the National Council of Urban Indian Health, says the severity of COVID-19 is impacting the Indian Health Service.
The pandemic will not wait for an election, and Congress can't wait either. It is the obligation of the government to provide these resources to Indian country. As our allies, we urge this committee to impress upon your colleagues the urgency of meeting this obligation, as full funding would aid in eradicating centuries of systemic oppression that has led to this pandemic impacting Indian country significantly more than it would have had IHS been fully funded.
Leaders of the national organization say chronic underfunding of programs and the federal government's neglect has exposed the vulnerabilities in tribal communities having high COVID-19 infection rates. A recent Center for Disease Control and Prevention study found in 23 selected states, COVID-19 cases among American Indians and Alaska Natives were 3.5 times higher than whites. Meanwhile, this week, lawmakers are working to pass another relief package.
I'm Antonia Gonzalez.
The first member of Congress to endorse Donald Trump for president 4 years ago cited the coronavirus today as he asked to delay or modify his 26-month prison sentence. Christopher Collins, he's 70, is supposed to report to a federal prison camp in Pensacola, Florida on October 13th after pleading guilty last year to conspiracy to commit securities fraud and lying to law enforcement officials. Lawyers for the former Republican congressman asked a judge who sentenced him in January to modify the sentence to eliminate incarceration or let him delay starting it until December. They cited the coronavirus, saying it continues to rage in Florida, and Collins's age and health condition put him at greater risk of serious or life-threatening complications if he contracts it. They said prosecutors had opposed their request. Collins was representing the 27th Congressional District of New York when prosecutors said he fed information about a biotechnology company to his son so his son and friends could avoid $800,000 in stock losses before an announcement of a failed drug trial caused the stock to plunge nearly 100%. A British lawmaker has apologized for traveling to London to attend a coronavirus debate in Parliament despite having COVID-19 symptoms. She also took a train home to Scotland after getting a positive test. Simon Marks reports.
In Britain, there are calls for a Member of Parliament to be prosecuted for using public transport after she tested positive for COVID-19. Margaret Ferrier has been suspended by the Scottish National Party and in an apologetic statement said she has no excuse for her actions. Scotland reporter Phil MacDonald.
Not only do you have Margaret Ferrier developing symptoms on the Saturday, requesting a test and taking it, but then travelling to Parliament 2 days after, then getting a positive test result and returning home knowing full well that she had COVID-19.
Simon Marks, Washington.
A study of more than 500,000 people in India who were exposed to the novel coronavirus suggests that the virus's continued spread is driven by only a small percentage of those who become infected. And according to a paper by researchers from the United States and India, published September 30th in the journal Science, children and young adults were found to be potentially much more important to transmitting the virus, especially within households, than previous studies have identified. Researchers from India, Johns Hopkins University and the University of California, Berkeley, worked with health officials in the southeast Indian states of Tamil Nadu and Andhra Pradesh to track the infection pathways and mortality rate of 575,000 individuals who were exposed to 85,000 confirmed cases of COVID-19. It is the largest contact tracing study, which is the process of identifying people who came in contact with an infected person, conducted in the world for any disease. Reporter Rebecca Bunton in Mumbai, India.
India continues to be the second worst affected country in terms of COVID-19 infections after the United States. Despite this, the government on Wednesday said that schools would be permitted to gradually reopen this month, while cinemas will be able to operate with 50% of their seating capacity. It is up to the individual states to decide whether they go ahead with easing restrictions. The state of Maharashtra, of which Mumbai is the capital, has decided that this month it will finally allow restaurants to reopen to dine-in customers as authorities try to kickstart the economy. Rebecca Bunton, Mumbai.
You're listening to the Evening News on KPFA Berkeley, KPFK Los Angeles, KFCF Fresno, online at kpfa.org.
Hey everyone, this is Brian Edwards-Teekert.
And I'm Kat Brooks.
Weekday mornings we host Upfront.
2 hours of conversation about what's in the news and what should be.
Politics, technology.
Prisons, police.
What's happening in City Hall and at the State House.
In Washington and in the streets.
That's starting at 7 a.m. right after Democracy Now!
On Upfront.
And we are trying to raise some money here on the Evening News to keep the Evening News on the air because this is week 2. We're wrapping up week 2 of the fund drive here at KPFA. We're actually hoping to end it a little early, lop off a day or so of the fund drive next week. But right now, we need to raise $2,500, and I need your help. I need you to call 1-800-439-5732 and make a pledge. I'd like you to consider becoming a sustaining sponsor, a sustaining member of this radio station by pledging a certain amount each month and making that contribution an installment payment, agreeing to contribute $5, $10, $15, $20 a month, whatever you can afford, and tying that to an automatic deduction from your bank account or charge to your credit card or your debit card. 1-800-439-5732 or online. You can do that online too at kpfa.org. KPFA.org. 1-800-439-5732, KPFA.org. Refugee advocates are calling on Congress to halt the Trump administration plans to lower its limit on refugees allowed into the United States to a record low. Religious groups, including some that President Trump is courting for re-election support, said today that further tightening of America's doors to refugees is immoral. They spoke a day after the government unveiled plans to reduce by more than 16% the number of refugees admitted to the country. That 15,000 target is the lowest since Congress passed the 1980 Refugee Act. Reporter Rachel Silverman has more.
The Trump administration says next year it will admit up to 15,000 refugees into the United States. That's the lowest number in 40 years, and a drop of 3,000 people from the cap set for 2020. Refugee advocacy groups say the cap is a symbol of the abdication of the U.S. from its humanitarian leadership role. Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden has pledged to restore high levels of refugee admissions if elected. Rachel Silverman, San Francisco.
Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny, who's recovering in Germany after being poisoned in Russia by a nerve agent, is accusing Russian President Vladimir Putin of being behind the attack. In his first interview since the attack, Navalny told Germany's Der Spiegel magazine that he believes Putin was behind the assault. He said he didn't have any other versions of how the crime had been committed. The Kremlin called the charge against Putin absolutely groundless and unacceptable. Heavy fighting between Armenian and Azerbaijani forces over the separatist region of Nagorno-Karabakh continued for a fourth straight day today, with a statement from both sides indicating the flare-up of a decades-old conflict that's killed dozens of people since Sunday was no closer to an end. The president of Azerbaijan said Armenia's withdrawal from Nagorno-Karabakh was the sole condition to end fighting over the separatist territory. The Armenian officials alleged Turkey's involvement in the renewed conflict and said its neighbors' actions hinder the efforts of the international community to cease the hostilities. Armenia and Azerbaijan have been locked for decades in a conflict over Nagorno-Karabakh, where a separatist war was fought in the early 1990s until 3 years after the breakup of the Soviet Union. The region in the Caucasus Mountains is of about 1,700 square miles, roughly the size of the state of Delaware, is 30 miles from the Armenian border. Soldiers backed by Armenia occupied the region, as well as some Azerbaijani territory outside of it. Simon Marks reports.
On Tuesday, Armenia's defense ministry claimed one of its jets was shot down by Turkish forces. Turkey, which backs Azerbaijan in the conflict, denies the claim. But as we reported earlier this week, it's precisely the kind of escalation that could drag other neighbouring countries, including Iran and Russia, into a conflict that suddenly became very heated last weekend. Michael Safi is international correspondent for The Guardian and explains the background to the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict.
This is disputed territory. It legally belongs to Azerbaijan, but its population is majority Armenian, and they, about 25 years ago, declared themselves to be an independent republic. They get support from Armenia, but Azerbaijan has never quite accepted that. They've always said they're going to get it back. On the other hand, Armenia says that they're going to continue to support this, plucky republic inside Azerbaijan. Inevitably, it was going to lead to clashes at some point.
Emergency talks took place at the United Nations on Tuesday night. Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has spoken to both the President of Azerbaijan and the Prime Minister of Armenia and called for an immediate cessation of hostilities and a de-escalation of tension. It's unclear whether those words will be heeded. Simon Marks, Washington.
Firefighters are warily watching today for violent winds expected in California's wine country that could fan the flames of a massive blaze that has destroyed nearly 250 buildings and is threatening thousands more in the town known for hot springs, mud baths, and wineries. More fire crews and equipment were deployed overnight in and around Calistoga in the hills of Napa County after a forecast called for strong winds amid extreme heat and low humidity that was forecast for later today in the afternoon. More than 2,000 firefighters are battling the glass fire, which has charred 89 square miles in Napa and Sonoma counties with almost no containment. It's destroyed about 250 buildings, including 143 homes. About 70,000 people are under evacuation orders, including the entire population of Calistoga. California's power grid operator called for voluntary conservation of electricity today from 3 in the afternoon to 10 o'clock tonight, as high heat was expected to grip the state, taxing electricity supplies primarily from the use of air conditioning. About 150 miles to the north of wine country, the Zog fire has killed 4 people. The Shasta County Sheriff's Office released 2 of their names today. Karen King, who is 79 years old. She was found on the road where the fire started. Kenneth Vossen, who was 52, suffered serious burns and later died in a hospital. Both were from the small town of Igo. The deadly blaze that spread to neighboring Tehama County has burned 86 square miles and destroyed 147 buildings, about half of them homes. It was about 1/4 contained. The Glass and Zog fires are among nearly 30 wildfires burning in California. Fire-related deaths in the state this year total 30 so far. The glass fire forced an estimated 70,000 to evacuate. KPFA's Corinne Smith went to an evacuation site to see how residents of Santa Rosa's Oakmont neighborhood, mostly seniors, are doing.
Because of COVID, a lot of evacuation sites are just parking. This is a community park in Santa Rosa called A Place to Play. There's a small tent with snacks, water, and a map of the park, but only about a dozen vehicles in the lot.
This time, I thought, here we go again.
That's Ann Johnson from Oakmont, a neighborhood of Santa Rosa. She's 83, and it's her second fire evacuation in 4 years. Last time, she brought a neighbor who's 14 years older.
When they notified me, I knew that she would not have TV or anything. So I said, we've got to go be sure she's okay. And I ended up taking her with me, and we were 15 days rather than a couple of days, 2017.
This time, the call came around 11 p.m. on Sunday night. Johnson then called her neighbor, who's 97 now. The neighbor was leaving with her caretaker. Then Johnson collected her own go bag and got in her car.
Normally it takes me 5 minutes. It's a mile to the entrance to Oakmont. Took me 47 minutes.
Eventually, she got to her niece's home in another part of Santa Rosa, but soon the niece's family left the area to get clear of the smoke. So Johnson moved to a friend's house for the week. Now she's sitting in the park in a folding chair, charging her phone.
Hello? Hi, I'm just calling to check on you. I'm doing fine.
Right now, she's the only one there. She's waiting for news, hopefully the all clear to go home. I asked her how she feels with wildfires happening every year now.
It's a little scary, and I sat down and I thought about moving somewhere else, but I thought, where would you go? You know, I'm 83. I don't feel like starting all over again. I have family in various places, but I don't want to live in Arkansas. I don't want to particularly live in Colorado. And I don't want to go back to the East Coast where I started in New England. So where am I going to go?
And that report from KPFA's Corinne Smith. The red flag severe fire warning for most of Northern California has been extended through Saturday, and they spared the alert for the smoke from the fires in the Bay Area has been extended through next Tuesday. Partly cloudy skies tomorrow in the San Francisco Bay Area with highs in the upper 70s. Further inland, it will be sunny with a high of 100 degrees, a high near 100 in the central San Joaquin Valley tomorrow, and also sunny skies in Los Angeles. A little cooler there with highs in the mid-90s. That's it for the news tonight. Thanks for joining us. I'm Mark Miracle. Good evening.
Tune in Thursday nights, starting at 7 p.m. for Apex Express, a weekly magazine-style radio show featuring the voices and stories of Asians and Asian Americans from all corners of their communities. Then at 8, it's a unique mix of singer-songwriter, folk, rock, soul, country, and R&B on The Bonnie Simmons Show. Finally, at 10 p.m., The Here and Now with Dirk Richardson, bringing you a mix of singer-songwriters to avant-garde jazz, old faves, new voices, and live performances. That's Thursday nights on 94.1 KPFA and kpfa.org.
You're listening to 94.1 KPFA, 89.3 KPFB in Berkeley, 88.1 KFCF in Fresno, 97.5 K248BR in Santa Cruz, and online worldwide at kpfa.org.
The following